but please share your name, your pronouns, and the communities you are a part of. So my name is Tyson Bankert. I live in Calgary virtually my entire life, and I'm really honored to be able to witness so many communities and people grow over the last however many years I've lived here. And who I am can be really summarized in my personal slogan, which is to edify others, befriend the lonely, and promote justice. And my pronouns are he, him.
My name is Amanda Palmer. I use the pronouns she, her, and I grew up as an uninvited guest on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe in a small town in what is currently known as Eastern Ontario. But I've been living here in Mohkinstsis for nearly 8 years now, and I'm really grateful to call it my home. And it was here that I really uncovered my passion for community development, and I'm really grateful to be with you all this morning. Tyson and I have the pleasure of working for CDLI, the Community Development Learning Initiative, which is, for those of you who don't know, a community-minded Calgary-based network that is for people who are seeking to deepen their connections and their capacities to create positive change in their communities. And I like to describe our work as holding space for imagining new futures together, where all people in Calgary welcome each other and work together to take collective action for the common good. And we aim to do this by convening people passionate for community regularly, whether that's at one of our monthly meetups or our monthly practitioner gatherings or other special offerings on specific topics, or things like this gathering that we're here at this morning. And in addition to convening, we also aim to build capacity, which has primarily been through our training called Success in Community Action. And we also seek to be a resource hub, sharing tools, information, connections, and the stories of people and groups who are doing important work in Calgary and beyond, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with because many of you have been involved in that process or featured recently. So that's a little bit about who we are. And to kind of get us set up for the morning, we wanted to kind of give you a bit of insight as to why we are doing this event today. And so why what's possible? So as we've been having conversations with various communities across the year, we've been hearing a lot about the changes that are taking place right now, whether that's change that's happening to us because of the pandemic, or because the makeup of our communities is shifting as people leave and arrive, or as our leadership has changed. We have a new mayor, we have a new council, so there's been a lot of kind of external changes happening to us, but there's also been a lot of conversations about the changes that we want to see that are needed to make our communities more just, anti-racist, to be able to tackle the climate crisis that we are facing right now. And over the summer, we were inviting people to go into their communities and ask what surprises you about what people in your community are talking about right now. And that was to practice some curiosity and surface what's on people's minds and where they might be going. And we've been having a lot of conversations outside of that, some of which you can see in recordings on our website right now, with some of the wonderful people here, in fact, with people about changes in their communities and the possibilities that they see for moving forward. And so today, we are holding space with the hopes to dig into this idea of change and possibilities deeper together. First, we're going to be hearing from an incredible group of Calgarians who collectively have talked to tens of thousands of their neighbors this year in the lead up to our municipal election, which was held in October. And because they ran, they also have done a lot of work personally and with their communities to not only think about the possibilities, but put forward their own visions for that. So they offer some unique perspectives on the changes past, present, and future, and what that means for the possibilities for our communities moving forward. So we're super excited to be hearing from them shortly. And then after the roundtable, we'll take a break, and then we'll be going into some facilitated breakout rooms where you will have the opportunity to dig into your own reflections about how your communities are changing, what possibilities there are for you and your communities, and what that looks like moving into next year. And we will hopefully all be leaving today with at least one action that you can take towards these new futures, and hopefully some support and new connections along the way as well. So I'll pass it back to Tyson.
Thanks, Amanda. So I'm so pleased to be part of this community roundtable and hosting us this morning. As a civic nerd, I've listened to each of our panelists over the past year talking about your campaign and the principles that guide you. and community being one of them. It really resonates with me. And so each of you, as Amanda said, have unique perspectives on community based on your experiences, backgrounds, and involvement in civic life. So I'll just spend a brief moment here introducing everyone. So there's Marilyn North-Peigan. Marilyn has been advocating for the city to have a renewed relationship with community. Marilyn's leadership is in the development of the report that I just mentioned, the White Goose Flying Report, which offers direction that our city and communities can take towards reconciliation. On a personal note, Marilyn was my vote for Ward 7, and so I'm really glad to have you here. Next up is Kourtney Penner, Ward 11 Councillor. Kourtney has been championing community life through her work, but whether it's her former position as at Haysboro Community Association president or her past work with even CDLI and so many other great community initiatives. So thanks, Kourtney, for being here today. Then we have, next up, we have Lana Bentley. Lana is about impact with a strong sense of how people can come together and foster belonging. Lana's resolve for inclusion, equity, and wellness is a refreshed approach to community building. Lana took her inspiring campaign to Ward 6. And then we have Humara Falak. Humara is a community development practitioner, and pushing against barriers is the foundation of their work. Humara's focus has been on mental health and systems change within the Calgary Board of Education, which is very needed in our public institutions. Humara ran for school board trustee for Ward 5 and 10. So thank you everyone for being here today. I'm going to just share a really brief guideline for our questions and for our roundtable. So each member, please try to spend a maximum of 3 minutes on your response. At the end of each round, I'd like then for one of the fellow panelists to respond, comment, or give any additional thoughts as to what they heard in this question. So the order for the first question here will be Humara, Kourtney, Lana, and Marilyn. I know you folks are probably quite used to this sort of format, but you do have a few more minutes to actually in your response. So each of you strongly suggested and practiced the value of community life as an important part of your platform. So my question is, what did it mean for you to be the candidate in your race that spoke to the value of community life, and why? So Humara, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
For sure. Thank you so much. And Tyson, do let me if I cut out because I have a very shaky internet connection here.
No worries.
So thank you so much for having me here. So for me, actually, coming from a South Asian community, being a brown woman, and being a single parent, and my kids go to public school as well in Ward 5 and 10. I totally understand the the struggles that and the barriers that racialized communities face when it comes to navigating Calgary Board of Education and school system as such. So I felt that I could be that voice representing our diverse needs, because as you know, like Ward 5 and 10 are extremely diverse population, and from my work in the community, I felt that we do not have those equitable services that should be, or resources available for our students in Ward 5 and 10. So that was one of the things that I decided to run. Also, I just wanted to change the narrative that people would think that Ward 5 and 10 are the communities, or they would call them like deficit communities. So I just wanted to change the narrative that we add so much value to whatever we do. And we wanted our voice to be represented at the CB table so that policies that are made there should reflect our diverse needs. So, and one last thing I really want to add was because being a brown woman, I know how difficult it is to run for any public position, and especially if you are a single parent, if you do not have a lot of money, and if you don't have a family support. So for me, it was like so many barriers, but I really wanted to do it because I know that if I could do it, then maybe I do not know if I, because I did not win, but it's like at least I wanted to set an example for my daughters and other women from my community that if I could do it, they could do it as well, and I'm sure one of them would win one day. So that was that's there. So I think it's very important that we have to have those voices with lived experience at the policymaking table, so that our policies are inclusive of our diverse population here in Calgary.
Thanks, Humara. Absolutely. I'm so glad that you ran. Thank you. Kourtney?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Great to see maybe not faces at this moment, but a lot of names that I recognize, and great to be connecting with you on this call and to be back. Hi, Marilyn. I want to reach through the screen and hug so many of you. What did it mean to be my background is in community. And my big why for running was a lot of the experiences I had as a president of a community association, so Haysboro, and as a board member as well, and then getting to know other community leaders. I see Keith on the call. I know Ariam, even Julie. There was a whole bunch of wonderful people around here who lead different kinds of communities, but often experience some of the same connections with the city. And some of those connections are really positive, and some of those connections need a little bit of work in order for us to move things forward. And so that was a real impetus for me for running, was to try to, and having that systems understanding and where we can improve it. Throughout the campaign, we tried to connect in with communities in different ways. So we attended community events, we were along parks and pathways, we went to the dog parks. So recognizing that community, we often think of it as sort of like our physical neighborhood, but as we know, as community practitioners, communities are kind of actually about that shared interest in belonging. And so we tried to find those different pockets of communities where we could reach residents in Calgary. And for me, it was a really great learning experience in the sense that COVID really has highlighted how community dependent we are and how much so many of us miss community. It was very interesting as we flexed through the campaign, through the various stages of opening and closing through COVID, where, sometimes we could gather and sometimes we couldn't. And just that roller coaster of emotions around being with people, I saw as being one of the most difficult and challenging things. And, when we were on the doors, we met so many isolated individuals. And that was for me one of the most challenging things. I cried on the doors. I can't even count the number of people I cried on the doors with because of their isolation, and so trying to, find someone that they could connect into. And so, community is really going to drive the work that kind of hopefully comes out of the next 4 years, and thinking about that community-based mindset and the people focus. So whether we're talking about homelessness and addictions and mental health, or whether we're talking about, climate change, there is a community lens to all of that. And we need to make sure that we're including the groups and people. My hope is that some of the things that we did during the campaign, reaching out and being in community, that we're going to be able to continue that forward as part of our engagement strategy, connecting with residents. So we're not just going to be doing the typical town halls. It's going to be like, come go skating with us, come for a toboggan party, come walk dogs with us. So finding different ways to connect in, and then reach that broad group of residents.
Thanks, Kourtney. Lana, you're up next.
Thank you. It's nice to see my fellow candidates on the line again, and congratulations, Kourtney, on your victory. Well deserved. I think I might answer this question a little bit differently. In terms of what did it mean for me to be the candidate in my particular ward that spoke to these issues, my background is in mental health. I worked for Alberta Health Services for about a decade, and I worked in eating disorders, personality disorders, and I managed an inpatient psychiatric unit. Through working in those sorts of acute care settings, it became very apparent to me that rather than adopting a mindset of working in crisis, it's much more effective to work with crisis and then finally to prevent crisis. And so that was the orientation that I adopted when I ran, and my platform tried to reflect that. Not only is prevention better than cure, but it's much cheaper. And so I think in terms of the economic argument to prevent crisis, that's very clear. It's cheaper to invest. You get a much better return on investment when you put folks in affordable housing or allow them the opportunity to access affordable housing versus the cost associated with people who are houseless. And so there's plenty of economic arguments that supported where I was coming from. I will say this though, I was the lone woman who ran in my ward, and having a background in social work, we were curious as a campaign team. You're always sort of wondering what's the competition going to say about you, and certainly being a Black woman, and openly gay. We weren't sure whether my personal characteristics would become an inflection point. It was actually my career choice that subtly became picked away at. What could a social worker possibly understand about municipal issues and working in complex organizations? And so, I was certainly a champion for community issues, but I also had fairly factual and helpful ideas about other issues. It was very interesting to me as an individual going through this experience, how people perceived me based on, I think, assumptions we have about what a leader looks like and what a politician looks like and what background they bring to the table. So I was more than happy to champion those issues because they're important, they make sense. We all do better when we all do better together. But certainly on a personal level, it was very interesting to be that person who people understood certain things about and made certain assumptions about. And the irony was that for those who said they really valued fiscal prudence, they probably would have found a lot more in common with the air quotes progressive candidate, because most of the solutions I was proposing are much more affordable in the long run. But because they were being championed by somebody who was associated with being a bit more of a softie on social issues, people weren't able to embrace the full package. I don't know if that was the intention of that question, but certainly in terms of what it meant for me, it was a very complex and nuanced experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Lana. And absolutely. I think that why I wanted to hold space for this was that this idea of community is sometimes seen as not important. And yet, as we see here today and everyone here in the work that we do, it really is. So Marilyn, your opportunity to respond to that question.
Sure. First of all, I'm going to tell you, I went into this campaign kicking and screaming until the night before we did our launch. Coming from Treaty 7 and being a Blackfoot woman, there's no such thing as someone doing this, right? So I didn't have, mentorship or someone guiding me through to, I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be that first person. I was always that first person. I fell into municipal politics coming out of my master's degree when we sat down to do the White Goose Flying Report. And from there, I went on to the Calgary Police Commission. So I've been just following my doors. And then I had my uncle Adam and the individual who became my campaign manager hounding me for months. And every time I'd see them, they'd be like, "So you want to run?" I'd be like, "No." No, I just kept turning it down. But I think what actually pushed me to this brink was the night before I sat there and I thought, if, in 10 years, if I don't do this, am I going to have all these regrets coming to me? With all the things that I've acquired throughout the years. I've worked in the arts, I've worked for municipal government. I feel like I was in term the same time Nancy was, the same length. So how was I going to bring all these eclectic things that I've done in the city together? And what was I, it was all about community to me. So that was my answer there. And when I did come out of the gate, we went 110%. There was no more looking back going, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. We just did it. So, basically we brought all these communities together that I've been working with throughout the years, writing the White Goose Flying Report. It is about everybody in Calgary, and everybody here is about, it is about treaty people. And I wanted to bring that messaging out. And that, there's something I've been sitting here with for years that no one's been listening to, that people have ignored. And throughout the campaign, I kept hearing my policy retabled again. Look at that memorial outside of City Hall. People are going, well, we should have done this work when we tabled this to the city municipal back in 2016, and nothing was done. Nothing. We've done symbols. We have not done things that have actually been enacted to actually affect the entire community to in that degree. All we were doing is symbolic. So I was getting to the point where I was getting very frustrated. And for me to sit down and actually jump was about the scariest thing I've ever done. And that includes my military experience. And for me, it was all about bringing that community together, because I'm not just Indigenous. I'm not just a Canadian Forces veteran. Yeah, and one of the things I really highlighted in our campaign is, I'm a mom. Because up until 1996, people like me, we were not allowed to parent our kids. So I had a strong message I was bringing to the communities, and that was, you know what, we have to we have to bring reconciliation to the table, but we have to talk about the truth, because these are the things I've been working with the municipal since 2016. These are my pains. These are what I brought to the table, and it was about community. And when are these things going to when are people going to listen? When are people going to open their ears? I served for everybody in Canada, not just for Indigenous people, for people of all colors. I gave an oath when I was 19 years old to represent everybody with honor, and I have to abide by that. And that is a lifetime oath. And I had to keep that in mind as I walked this journey, because it was a painful one. I went through everything. I went through the Kevin J. Johnston thing right out of the gate. But what kept me going is that they pinned us as a grassroots progressive, because we brought the grassroots people together, and then from all avenues of this, of the directions. And that's where our power was with the campaign. And that really gave us power. That gave me power, especially the last month when we campaigned, because I have an army injury, and that really affected me, my back. And it was the community that kept me going. So, for me, it wasn't about me and my aspirations and jumping into this. I had no aspirations. I did not want to be a politician, but I have this knowledge and I need to share it. I am a product of systemic racism. I was a federal Indian day school, and all I've been doing is drawing policy for the city, out of these experiences. It's time for people to listen. That was my message. And it's about everybody in Calgary.
Thanks, Marilyn. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for jumping in. So you've all mentioned, the door knocking, the online chats, the one-on-one interviews, being present in public spaces. What were you hearing from people about community and specifically belonging? What surprised you about what you heard about belonging when you were touching base with folks throughout the campaign? What surprised you? And Kourtney, you're up first.
Yeah. So one thing that surprised me was a disconnect actually between communities. So whether it was like project-based learning, or whether it was just like finding, like being able to access and find communities for people to connect into, even though we are so digitally connected, you would think that we would be better at connecting in some ways or finding, but I actually find people really continue to struggle with that. And we truly need humans who have the knowledge to be bringing people together, to facilitate the conversations, to facilitate the learning. So it is sad that in such a digitally connected world that we still struggle to have that. And I would say people know of it, or they're like in a Facebook group, but they don't feel connected to that group because they haven't had an in-person connection. And so the thing that I was really hearing from people is just a real deep desire to continue to have those in-person connections. And it's been hard for people, right? I mean, we all know it's been hard for ourselves. And I want to acknowledge that, some of the conversations that like both Lana and Humera and Marilyn have brought forward this morning, we met so many people in our communities who have those same hurts, who feel unseen and unheard, who have been working so hard, and they just feel like their voices are not heard and not recognized. And that was the most difficult thing for me to hear day after day on the campaign. And it continues to be the most difficult thing that I hear day after day. I mean, I'm over here practically crying because it is so real and it is so hard, and we owe it to all of us to bring these stories to light and to bring this information forward so that we really can build a better city. So for me, what I heard is that there's opportunity to connect, but we often still need that invitation and that personal invitation to be part of a community. And so I guess my challenge back to everyone in the room today is, if you're in a Facebook group or you're in a community, find a way to connect individually with people. Reach out to someone you haven't connected with in a while. Ask them how they're doing. Go for a walk. Do whatever you need to do and connect with those people. We're really, really needing it.
Thanks, Kourtney. Yeah, those, even just a small connection can do so many great things. All right, Lana?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a great question. Social inclusion is one of the strongest drivers of healthy relationships, mental wellness. I think if you look at all the things you would want to see, at least for me, present in your neighborhood, in your city, social inclusion is such an important element of that has very real impacts for health and wellness. So I think in terms of what surprised me when I was out and about, I was actually quite shocked, and this is my own naivete, because certainly I'm not immune to. I surround myself with people who tend to agree with me and share my worldview, so I just assume everybody thinks about things the same way I do. But I was quite shocked about the impact of COVID-19 in the final weeks of the campaign and how divided people were. I remember we did one crescent, and we had one man saying really, really harsh things about people who chose not to get vaccinated. We heard just the opposite down the street, and these are neighbors. And one of my questions when people would get quite passionate expressing their opinions is, COVID-19 will come to an end. Who do you want your children to be able to play with when that day comes? Because neighborhoods became so divided around these issues. And I think that what I observed was how quickly issues that should be nonpartisan, non-political became politicized. And all of a sudden it became, if you're on this side of the issue, you're a good person. If you're on that side of the issue, you're a bad person. And I think my concern there is that you can build community around shared demographics. You can build it around geographically being close to each other, but you can also build community when you're fighting a common enemy. And I would hazard a guess that that's not how we want to build a sense of community in our city. We don't want to come together because we all dislike the same things. We want to come together because we have the same desire for positive things. And so I think I was surprised. There were certainly communities, like sub-communities developing within Ward 6, but it was more so around fighting a common enemy. And I do think that emotionally charged decisions, they can certainly sway a vote. They can gain a little bit of momentum, but longer term, communities that build around emotionally charged arguments where there's not a lot of facts present, those do eventually run out of gas, and they don't advance us where we want to be in terms of affecting positive social change. So I think I was definitely surprised by that, and it did invite me to recommit to not just be around people that agree with Lana, but for Lana to actively seek out being in proximity of others who have things to teach me or experiences that I don't necessarily give much consideration to, whether I agree with them or not. So I will say sometimes talking to folks who you disagree with teaches you the most about what you value and what you have yet to learn, and that was the case for me. Thank you.
Thanks for that share. Marilyn?
Well, there was a couple of things that really stood out when I was sitting here thinking about it. And, in the beginning, one of my greatest fears coming into this was the fear of racism and racist people. So I think where I started to, kind of sort of relax coming into that situation is that we were at an area down by my Legion, the Kensington Legion, and we were door knocking there, and I came around the corner, and there's all these people that were standing along the side of the corner, and they're all non-natives, and they all had native design masks on, and they were like, "Hey, you're Marilyn North-Peigan. Can you tell us about that part? Explain to us in the White Goose Flying about how everybody's treating people." And then I started to settle down. So I went over there and I started to explain to everybody. I was just standing on the street and talking, and the more I talked, the more people started to gather around me, the more they were. So we actually went there with a bunch of my campaign masks that a native artist designed. And by the time we left there, we were doing more orders. People just kept coming up to us. So they opened up that neighborhood to us. And the lady that actually asked me that question, she ended up being my volunteer coordinator a week later. So, we really picked up a lot of the community as we rolled along. And I think the other one where, I really felt like I was welcomed into the neighborhood was where I had this really bad night, and it was just horrible. And Justin Trudeau was in town that night. I remember this because I had a VIP, invite up there to the Northeast, and I ended up leaving that party. I was so mad. Like, I just left, and I'm not going to get into why, but I was parked in front of his bus, and then, in my vehicle that's marked as a Canadian Forces veteran, and I drove away. And I went to this other party where people were actually waiting for me to talk, and it was in Ward 7. So I pulled in there, and I was so angry. I just walked in there, and I was like, and I didn't know how they were going to react to me to begin with. And I just went in, I said, "Hey, everybody, I ditched Justin Trudeau for you all." And then all of a sudden the crowd just roared. And they're like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay, I can do this." And I settled down, and they're like, it was just the way I anticipated the community opening up to me was not what I saw so I know that this community is ready for somebody like me to eventually come into the picture, because I saw that as I encountered these communities, and that's what kept me going. So that was a very powerful part of this campaign.
Thanks, Marilyn. Himera.
Yeah, thanks, Tyson. So I don't know if I would want to say if I was surprised, because I already work in these communities, and I would say I'm deeply embedded in Ward 5 and 10. So I was kind of aware of their issues already before I started the campaign. But one thing that definitely stood out was that I was surprised that in Ward 5 and 10, people really, there was a huge disconnect among people and Calgary Board of Education, and actually they did not know what trustees do. And to my surprise, when I was door knocking, people would ask me what position I was actually running for and what's the role of trustees, and they have not ever heard of that before, and they had no idea as to who their current trustee was, or all of that. So throughout my campaign, I was not only doing my campaign, but I was also creating awareness around the role of school board trustees. That was there. Also, the whole voting process. I felt that people did not, and I'm talking especially with regards to ethnocultural communities or racialized communities, they did not know the process of, voting and how it works. And especially with federal elections happening at the same time, they were like really confused. And, so I felt that they needed that information, and maybe they needed that information in their own languages. There were barriers there. They did not know where to go and vote for and how that voting would work. So throughout my campaign, I was doing all of that alongside asking them to vote for me. So that was there. And beside that, I just want to also add to that what Lana said, or Kourtney or Marilyn, that I felt that people, they struggled definitely for human communication or human connection. But also in regards to specifically for CB issues, I noticed that people were struggling with online schooling, and they were not, especially people who were, going through some financial hardships due to COVID-19 and then, the economic downturn. So if they had 3 kids, they did not have 3 devices at home, and the schooling was at the same time. So there was that struggle that was going on. And then on top of that, the lack of, the knowledge as to how to access online forums, online, meetings, that was there too. Also, and keeping that aside, just talking from community development perspective as well, we noticed that people who were already marginalized, they were further marginalized
because of COVID-19. And, before that, we were training community leaders to, deal with mental health issues or domestic violence issues. But we felt that when COVID-19 happened, they did not have those skills to help people in times of crisis, which was a huge learning for us. As to now, we know that maybe we have to do more intensive training for them in case something like that happens in future. So it was a huge learning experience, for sure. And there were like so many things that came into focus, throughout my campaign. Yeah.
Thanks, Humera. Yeah, that education piece, I'm sure all of you saw that in different capacities of people's abilities to understand what the process is and how to engage in civically, but also, I'm sure, in community. Kourtney, any sort of response to what we've heard in this second round?
Yeah, I would just say that, we all heard some very emotionally charged conversations, and that I think we often go into campaigns, and I think a lot of us probably started our platform with this very fact-based thing, thinking that is what people were going to be wanting. And what we realize is through COVID and just people's capacity to have those fact-based conversations, whether it was about COVID itself or whether it was about building community or property taxes, we lost that frontal lobe ability, and so our conversations became emotionally charged. And so really a lot of the work we had to do through the campaign, and I hear it from Lana, from Marilyn, was switching to having those emotion-based conversations, which are trickier, but also open the door to real conversations about real needs. And I love the story, Marilyn, that you told about walking up to the Legion. And I think that really highlights the importance of asking an open-ended question and then what can come from that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, we'll go to the third question here. And I'm going to do a little bit of a setup, but we've all of you have mentioned it in different ways, but for most of us, the pandemic has uprooted our sense of community and how we can come together, and maybe even why we even get involved in community. And underneath the pandemic, there were other areas that might have impacted our communities and what it meant to show up. So, for example, Black Lives Matter protests, Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. As we know, calls to action 71 to 74 were finally felt and understood with the national discovery of the burial sites of Indigenous children across Canada. Others, growing inequity, climate injustice, that ideological polarization. So I'm curious, there's so many obstacles, and Kourtney, you kind of mentioned it, right? There was that, it became about emotion, but there also were a lot of opportunities to respond. So my question is, how did you respond to these growing concerns and cultural shifts when engaging the community at large? What can we kind of maybe learn from your response? And I also want to just appreciate the fact that we're all still on time. So this is really great, by the way. And I will ask Marilyn to go first.
Well, for me, it's also about the truth and reconciliation piece, because, here in Treaty 7, we have teachings that have been here since before time. And one of the tags I really didn't care for was progressive, because my knowledge has been here since before anybody else. So one of the issues that brings us together and is supposed to teach humanity in a universal method on how to actually get along and how to get past these challenges are the 7 sacred teachings that our elders have left for us here. And that's honesty, truth. I don't know if I can name them all. My elder probably get mad. Honesty, truth, wisdom, love, humility. And these are the things that ground you in what leadership and how people should relate to each other. So we need to start going back to the basics of what those are and those teachings are. And that was what my message was to that.
Thanks, Marilyn. Absolutely. Next up, Alana.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really, really intense, I think the last 2 years have been super intense. And, you know, in thinking about how some of these issues that you surfaced, Tyson, impacted the campaign, you know, I did get very pointed questions when I would engage with folks in the community. You know, what do you think about defunding the police? You know, very, very focused. And, you know, I think when you have a Black candidate, which is still not a very common occurrence, you know, people were also curious to know what are my opinions on Black Lives Matter specifically. So, you know, those are very challenging questions to answer. But I think the way that I would respond to folks who would bring that up is I think there's a difference between strategy and tactics. And I think that defunding the police, that is an instrumental change that you can make, but it certainly doesn't speak to the broader experience of racism and social exclusion that some members of our city feel. And so I think two things can be true at once. I think there are operational changes that can and should be made to improve the experience of people who come into contact with organizations like the police. But I think these issues are systemic for a reason, because they exist in really large systems that influence attitudes and behaviors that we don't even have conscious awareness of sometimes. So, you know, when I would get those questions, I'd be really clear with people. I want the same thing you do, which is to be able to walk my dog at 9 o'clock at night and not have to worry about somebody calling the police saying, who is she? And to be fair, through my professional work at YW Calgary, I've never hidden the fact that I have myself worked professionally with the police and had good experiences. So I think for me, it was about helping people understand beyond these talking points and 2021 election issues, there are broader issues that, to Marilyn's point, have persisted, unfortunately, for decades. And I think that moving the needle on those systemic issues is something that requires a lot of dedicated back-breaking work that doesn't just involve elected officials. I think there's a very vibrant activist community in our city as well that has been engaging in their own parallel process to try and generate public discourse about this. So for me, I did a lot more listening than I did talking, because I thought, you know, for me, and this is just my take on it, I'd be interested to hear what my three colleagues think, but I usually got the sense that people just wanted to know, how do you approach problem solving and making decisions versus what is your exact answer on this issue? Because 99% of people I talked to, they were pretty understanding that specific issues come and go, but who are you as an individual and how do you solve a problem? And they just wanted to know that I would weigh the facts, consult with constituents, and work within the scope of a city councillor. So we were pretty cool 9 times out of 10, even if we didn't see the issue the same way.
Yeah, thank you, Lana. Thank you. And yeah, our communities, that there's so many problems that we need to solve, and different people and different groups are solving them in the same direction, and each one has sort of a different part to play. So it's really important. Himera, what about you? What were some of maybe the obstacles that you found to your point about some of these some of those deeper issues that were surfacing in our communities?
For sure. I think language barrier for me, I think that stood out, because that is something that communities really struggle with, you know, be it like accessing or navigating Calgary Board of Education, or just in general other services, mainstream services. And mental health was something that, you know, I noticed that there was a huge concern among ethnocultural communities, and also among our students as well. And being a parent of, you know, 2 school-going children, I could totally understand what my kids were going through as well. So I repeatedly heard that, and also about, you know, better support for Indigenous students as well in Ward 5 and 10. And that was there too. So what Lana said, I think I did more like, I was more on the listening side, and, you know, be on their side. And I've always advocated for the issues that impact communities living in Ward 5 and 10. I've always done that as part of my job. So for me, it was, yes, the mental health was something that I did advocate for very strongly throughout my campaign, that we should have,
in-house mental health support services available in all the schools to better serve our communities in Ward 5 and 10. And also we need to have those equitable resources because the population is like so diverse. So there is no way one size fit would not work for it. We need to, come up with strategies or policies that would, reflect that. So I did talk about that throughout my campaign, but I did, as Lana said, I was there for them. I wanted to listen just to understand better, what they were going through. So again, COVID-19 has definitely impacted racialized communities in so many ways that, so I think, so that's there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you've all surfaced a really important piece when it comes to communities. Listening as a really integral part. Kourtney, your response to the question.
Thanks. So obviously being a white woman in a fairly predominantly white ward, a lot of the conversations that we had were different. So some of these challenges that we are facing around climate and truth and reconciliation, they didn't surface as much directly, but they surfaced in a really indirect way. And that is it was really based around income and property value and the fear of the other coming into a neighborhood through housing diversity. And so the conversations weren't explicit in saying, some people would be like, I don't want, I don't want more dense housing because renters cause problems. But really it was sort of like, I want to protect my status and my equity, and I don't want to lose my status and my equity by my neighborhood changing. And so that for me was actually the most challenging conversation that I had on the doors. Because in my mind, I'm like, but then you get more neighbors. And you can have more people at your block party. You get different appetizers. Like, that's my mindset, right? Thank you, Julie, for laughing at that. But that really wasn't. And then Ward 11 also, the difference I often would hear, depending on the different pockets we were in, the have neighborhoods and the have not neighborhoods. So the neighborhoods, right, where the income level is higher, right, you have more capacity for people to be, the perception is that there's more capacity for people to be involved, right? They've got more disposable income to invest into projects and into fundraising. And so you continue to see those communities get more and more, whereas the communities, right, where there's often like working families or parents are working 2 jobs, or even pockets of communities, and there's less time for that advocacy for those community needs, even if it's something like a safe crosswalk. So that is something that I really, really noted. And so, we kept a big tally sheet of problems that we heard on the doors, and some of the ones that we want to tackle first are in those areas where there is actually just less capacity, right, for people to understand and navigate the system. So we're definitely looking at that for sure. So that was an interesting one. And unfortunately, since being elected, I will, Marilyn, please don't make this cry. I will tell you the number one pushback on the budget we got was the money towards truth and reconciliation. And my heart is absolutely broken. And so we've been pushing back pretty hard on people. But people would have been happy with $20 million on snow and ice control. But we can invest in truth and reconciliation. So we have a lot of work to do in our city.
Thanks, Kourtney, for that. To Marilyn, actually, just a response to what you heard in this round.
Well, there's a lot of things we hear in this round. I'm going to say that we have to acknowledge what challenges that we've all identified coming along this journey. But we need to understand that there's still so much more work that we need to do into the future, and we need to hand this world over to our children in a better, place than how we received it. And that's the mentality that we have to understand. It doesn't matter, about who, status in society. It's in our hands right now. And this is what I always tell my elders. You gave me a world. You have to let me make my decisions, and you have to let me make my mistakes, but I'm going to hand it over better than how you handed it to me, because it's still not good enough right now. So there is a lot more work to come, but we have to acknowledge where we are today. And it's a lot further than where I was back in 2012 when I first sat on the committee with the city, the Citizens Advisory Committee. So we are moving ahead. It's going to be slow. And our elders tell us this is going to take 7 generations, but we need to start today, and we need to do things now.
Okay, we have a little bit of time here for a very quick lightning round. You've all mentioned some really difficult things and some of the challenges that you were facing at the doors and in the work. And so, mental health is really important. I'm curious how your community showed up for you while on the campaign trail. So what was maybe one meaningful action about how your community showed up for you? So I'm going to ask Lana to go first.
I think volunteering was certainly very helpful, and I will say the momentum that was generated through people showing up in that tangible way was very helpful. I think in a social media age, people, a hashtag costs you nothing, but it also doesn't amount to votes. And so when people would say, "What can I do to support you?" Donate, and I hate to bring it down to that, but I think we've now, I think, with the work of a lot of great advocacy groups, and I'll just shift it a little bit, Tyson, here, but I think it's great now that it's not uncommon to see women running, but for me personally, I'd like to see more women winning, and I think that the next piece of this conversation is now around fund development capacity, and getting more into those nitty-gritty components of campaigning. And so I was really, really humbled when I would have neighbors down the street texting me saying, "I'm going to go out and drop off. I can do 100 doors, or how many do you think, how many flyers could I drop off in an hour?" And I do think that those are the things that matter, is getting out the vote. So that was very helpful to me.
Glad to hear. So one of the things that community can do is showing up for people in person. Okay, got it. Humera, would you like to share what one thing that your
for sure,
to do?
So, for me it was actually very interesting, because I don't remember a single night when I did not actually cry myself to sleep. It was very, very difficult, to be honest, because I was fighting on so many fronts at the same time. I'm not generalizing it. I did get a lot of support from my community, and that's why I was number 3rd. But still, I faced a lot of pressure from just because I'm a woman. I faced a lot of pressure from my community and other ethnic communities to withdraw throughout my campaign. So there was this thing that I was constantly tackling, and then there were people telling me they could not support me openly. And I'm sorry, it's not the answer that we were expecting, but I'm just telling you that I went through this. And it wasn't easy, because if there were community leaders who come to me and tell me that they were not supporting me because of the whatever religious leaders were supporting other candidates, and all the thing that was going into that. So it was not easy for me. I think the most difficult 3 months of my campaign, that and I remember that how hard it was for me and mentally tough it was for me. But I'm extremely grateful for all my friends and all the community members, and also especially all those people outside my community who were extremely supportive and who kept on telling me not to withdraw and not to give up. Whatever support I got, I'm extremely grateful for all those people who donated towards my campaign. I did not even so I'm extremely grateful for whatever support I got, and I'm happy that with very limited resources and not many volunteers, we were still able to get a lot of votes. Which is encouraging for me, for sure. But for me, it wasn't easy. It was extremely mentally and emotionally draining, for sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Humera, for being so vulnerable and sharing all of that with us. The complexities it's surmountable, for sure. Thank you.
Was that me, Tyson? Sorry.
I may be mute. That's okay. What's one thing that your community was able to do for you at this time?
Yeah, for sure. So I think through this process, I got a new community, and that was other candidates. And so there's a couple pieces to that. So one, I could connect with other candidates from across the city, and within my own ward. And I know I'm really grateful, or I know I'm really lucky, and I'm very grateful for that, because some of the other candidates that ran in 11 were amazing humans. And we texted each other fairly regularly. We had like a volatile doors list that we shared. If someone's sign was down, we would just fix it for each other, or we'd let the other person know. So there was a really good working relationship in 11 amongst most of the candidates, for sure, 4 of us. And there was some big ideological split, but we could message each other, and that was really nice and a real surprise for me. And I think it made for a more productive campaign. And I think it made it, unfortunately, harder for the voters of Ward 11, because we would be tagging each other and sharing good things. But generally, finding a new community has been so grateful, or has been such like a blessing. And so that, for me, being able to just message another candidate because being a candidate, as Humira said, it is emotionally exhausting, and it is something that only other candidates know. So
thanks, Kourtney. Marilyn, we'll leave the last lightning round to you.
Sure. Well, I'm going to tell you, I was the first Blackfoot to do this, and it's not my system. It's a Western system. It's not meant to accommodate somebody like me. So I played my cards for the hand I was dealt. So, and I think towards the last, you hear there's emotional drain in it, and it is very emotionally draining. I think towards month 5, I really my mental started to sink. And you got to remember, I'm intergenerational trauma too, so there was a portion of this campaign trail that was missing from my life. And how my community stepped up for me was my elders started to notice that something wasn't right. So they stepped in and they brought in that ceremonial aspect into my background. So we, my inner circle for the campaign, we were starting to sit down with the elders and to actually do those ceremonies to bring me back to the grounding and to really talk to me, especially in the end, about humility, because there was so much going on over Twitter with the egos, and that was really starting to sink me. That's toxic. Those are things that you just can't. And so the teachings of humility, grounding back into those 7 sacred teachings, not engaging in those kind of activities because it's not my way. Mm-hmm. So those are the things that my community really had to hold me on, especially the last 3 months of this campaign trail, was they had to hold me spiritually, because this is not my system, and it was not meant to accommodate me. It was not meant for my people. So the toxicity was times 10 as to what everybody else faced. And I had to bring those 2 worlds together, or I would have dropped out like very early on.
Thanks, Marilyn. Thanks everyone for that. Yeah, I heard spiritual care. I heard connecting with people from different sides, the complexity of our communities, and so thank you so much for sharing. The last question here, and the name of our program today is we're exploring what's possible. And we're going to dig deeper in the second portion of our program to identify what is possible and surfacing it. And I thank you so much for all of you for helping us capture all of the things that really have been difficult over this past couple of years in community. But also there were so many great things that I also heard about what was possible. And so for where you sit and the influence all of you have in the community and our conversation, I'm curious to know what's next, what's possible moving forward for our collective sense of community. And that's a really big question, but I'd really like to know, and for folks here to kind of share their wisdom on what does moving forward look like. So I will ask Lana to go first, and then we will then go to Humira.
Sure. Thanks, Tyson. Just when I used to work as a therapist, one of the things that we would share with families was that crisis equals opportunity. And so I do think that although the past 2 years has been very destabilizing, it didn't create a lot of the social issues that we've given space for today. It made them much, much worse. And I do think that we're now at a moment in time where, regardless of one's political persuasion or social status, there is a growing recognition that we are all in this together, and what happens to my neighbor does impact me. And so to that end, I do think there is a lot of interest right now in coming up with new and different ways to solve problems in our community. So I'm actually very optimistic. And I do think that people are alive to these issues, and though they may not know where to go and what to do with that, I do think there is a paradigm shift that is slowly taking place. And I would also say I think what's possible is whatever we want to be possible, but I think what's required to get there does mean lowering some of our defenses and lowering the good guy, bad guy binary. Fundamentally, we're all Calgarians and we all want the same thing. And I do think that it'll be really important for us to come together around what we have in common and to demonstrate tolerance for those who are different than us if we want to move forward in a collaborative, effective way. But I do think the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, the discovery of the grave sites, I do think it has piqued people's interest. And now more than ever, folks who were normally quite quiet on these issues before, we're hearing from them. And it may not necessarily be what we want to hear, but we are hearing that there is an interest in moving forward collectively and from a place of strength. So I'm really optimistic about what the future holds.
Thanks, Lana. Himera.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Lana. We all saw like how communities stepped up to help each other in terms of in times of crisis and whatever support. Now I'm talking in regards to my agency. We were providing them. They actually were taking ownership of that, and they were going out in the community, especially the community leaders and the informal supporters. They were out in the community dealing with issues, and they were bringing those issues to us. So we saw that. So that means that communities are coming forward. There is definitely a collective sense of belonging, or a bigger sense of community there. So we just need to, I think, continue creating awareness around issues that impact us as a bigger community, be it like racism or mental health issues or domestic gender-based violence, all of that. Also, I think there is a huge population that we know is definitely they are, because we know that there are more than 240 ethnicities that exist in Calgary, and there's so many languages that we may not even have heard of. So, and there is a huge chunk of population that is falling through the cracks. So instead of waiting for them to come to us, to service providers, I think we need to go to them, and we need to find ways to, either through community leaders or informal supporters or brokers, cultural brokers, to get to those communities and talk about issues that impact them, and then bring them to the tables where policies are made, because that's important. We need to have that ethnocultural lens present, or lens of intersectionality present there, right? So that's there. Yes, again, I'm very optimistic, and I know we can do a lot, but we need to actively work towards. And one thing I really, really want to mention is that for funders to understand as well the importance of community development and community projects, that, community change would not happen in a year or so. It would take years before you would be, finally able to change, right? So we need to create that awareness as well around prevention and not just focus on intervention. So that's there too. Yeah.
Thank you, Himera, for that. There were so many great things that I heard you say about going in, all of our communities sometimes go, why aren't people showing up? Why isn't this happening? It's like, well, are we going to them? What does that look like? What does that look like for our communities? And community development and community work is a slow burn, and thank you for highlighting that as well. Kourtney.
I'm going to be the optimist like Lana. I think anything is possible. I think right now what's really needed is to cheerlead and encourage those who are in decision-making positions. And that's in every organization. So if you see an organization or you see a leader who is doing good work, this kind of goes back to that mental health component. Reach out to them and tell them that you support them. Just like, even a thumbs up, just saying like, thank you for moving this forward. Leaders often get told what they're doing wrong a lot, right? They get the noisy, and we know that they're the noisy minority often, but it is tricky and it is challenging. So for leaders who are in any position, whether it's in that local community level, let them know that what you want to see more of. And I think that's an important thing, like keep doing this more, and that we want to hear from you. So whether it's your local elected official or it's maybe another one, like I'll take a great comment from anybody in the city. But just, I think that's really important, to encouraging leaders to keep going and to keep pushing forward, and so that they know that they're making a really positive difference.
Thanks, Kourtney. Yeah, we'll add that to the list of cheering the leaders on for sure. Marilyn.
Oh, I just had a thought about a teaching that I was taught. It's from Casey Eagle Speaker, and he's an elder, and he does a lot of work with the community here. And he talks about analogy of the buffalo as being, today we actually look at education as the new buffalo. So, back in the day, the people utilized absolutely every portion of that buffalo to survive. Today, we change that into the education. We have to use everything with that education to connect the communities in a way that's going to bring us forward, that and that we need it for our children. That is what is most needed. So, we got to keep that in mind. With me, I just took the vice chair position for commission. So my future there is going to be sitting there and making sure that I still influence, what everybody's talking about with this. And I really hear a lot about the engagement policy, and this has been my issue since 2017, is, that we have to prevent this K-shaped recovery coming out of this COVID. A K-shaped recovery is a recovery that's aimed at one class of people. And now we know that we have vulnerable populations, we have indigenous populations, we have Black populations, we have minority populations that are falling through those gaps. How are we going to recover in a way that's going to bring us all together as a community? And those are the voices that are very important. And that city engagement piece, I know, is flawed, because I use the same thing in commission, and there are days I've had to stand in front of the Native community myself and go, everybody, I need your help. And I can't do that all the time. So we need to start fixing these little issues that give us those messaging into the community. And that is most needed right now, because those voices are missing, and we need to bring that up to par.
Thank you, Marilyn. Yes, the equity piece is so crucial to all of our collective need. It is 11:15. I want to thank each and every one of the panelists for encouraging all of us today to move forward and reflect. And I appreciate all of the vulnerability that was shared today. We will be taking a bit of a break, and we'll come back with new energy here and new hope to begin thinking about what exactly can come next for our communities, and begin taking some of these really great actionable steps you've all mentioned. So thank you so much for each and every one of you today, and for your input, and for really just for demonstrating to me specifically about what community can look like at a civic level, and how vital and important your perspectives are. So thank you so much.